Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fractional Forum. Okay, I can see myself. You may have already noticed Tracy Borison, our amazing facilitator and host, is a little under the weather today, so she won't be here. So I will do my best to fill her very spunky shoes. So today on the Fractional Forum, we are planning to talk about all things fractional. Fractional resources are continually becoming more and more readily available, hence the five of us today. Many, many more that you might see across LinkedIn. But how do you know it's what you need? And where do you start in working with them? So this week, we're going to talk about it, some symptoms in business that could possibly impact you could be impacted by bringing on a fractional resource and where to start in assessing a best place for one in your organization. So I'm going to start off going right away and defer to Vered. Actually, I'm going to pick on you, Vered, because you've been doing the fractional, at least part of the offering of your business for the longest time. So why don't you kick off for today and let us know your how you got into the business of fractional.
Yeah, I think there's, Carolyn and I probably have very similar experiences in that there's some basic things that organizations need. And so that's typically where the entry point is. And companies grow to a size where they say, okay, well, now we have 10 employees and we don't have any policies. And that's concerning because there's that compliance piece that's required, those foundational pieces of the business to keep them, keep risk at bay. So that's typically where it starts. And then we start to have conversations around what else is happening and the number of hats that CEO is wearing or someone else that's in a senior leadership role. And, if you think about what that hourly rate is and they're drafting policies and entering employee information, it starts to not really make so much sense. But there's also, an opportunity to be more strategic around how they're managing their business. And that's where the real value add comes into play. And I think we can all speak to that piece quite well. I think where the challenge lies and knowing when you're ready is a different conversation. And so from my experience in doing this for 8 years, I think I started off saying yes to everything and I could help everyone and scoop in. And what I have found is success lies in the leadership team's openness to change and openness to learning and shifting and delegating and really taking in that advisory support that you can get from a fractional expert in really shifting the way that you operate your business. So I'll
I
start
think one thing that you
the
said,
conversation.
yeah, one thing that you said that I feel like is pretty much a conversation starter is wearing too many hats. That is one thing. As a small business, you're wearing all the hats. And as you are, a victim of your own success, you start bringing on more individuals that help with those hat wearing. And I was having a conversation just the other day with someone about fractional leadership, and they were asking me, just to define it and talk about it. And one thing I said that is that there is often fractional COOs, CMOs, CROs in businesses all the time. They just may not be an outsized resource. And what I mean by that is you're never going to do anything the entire time you're working on something. I think, Carolyn, you're a CFO. There is probably times in your day that you are doing more bookkeeping or controlling, or you're not always sitting in that strategic level. So there is always an element of fractional all the time, and there is wearing a lot of the hats. So maybe let's start and talk about all these hats that CEOs end up wearing.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak in terms of my own experience running my own business and the evolution of that. And, I used to do my invoicing and create all the internal processes and document things, and it got to a point where I just thought, well, that's taking away from, well, A, what I really love to do, which is
Mm-hmm.
part of the community and have conversations with entrepreneurs and find ways to connect them to other people to really, drive forward the things that they want to do in business. So yeah, A, like making the things that I enjoy and keep me going and ignite that fire to continue on. That I'm difficult. But then it's really actually not taking time. I'm not an expert in those spaces. I'm very inefficient. And so getting to that point where, yeah, economically it makes sense, there's greater opportunity on the other side. That's not,
Baird, your microphone's being kind of spotty there.
okay.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure we got all of that. Maybe Tim, you can jump in there.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in a little bit because I picked up enough of what Jared was saying, and I wanted to connect back to, as a small business owner, we have our own superpowers, and there's things that we're really, really good at. But as small business owners, you have to wear all those hats that Jared just talking about: sending out the invoices, hiring people, dealing with the technology, managing those crazy salespeople that seem to just do everything wild and different, or the creative people, whatever the case is. But it comes down to starting with a little bit of self-reflection, right? Like Jared was talking to there about, I don't enjoy the invoicing. That's not the part of this that really fires me up in the morning, and I want to get out of bed and do those invoices and send out those details and try to collect payments. You know what? Somebody else really does like that. And so that's where you look at, where are the things keeping me up at night? Where are the things I'm not strong at? And am I willing to let the reins go and let somebody else look after that for me? And so fractional really helps because, like you were saying a second ago, Lindsay, I think it was you, as a CEO, you're doing things fractionally already. You're wearing the accounting hat, the HR hat, the operations hat, the technology hat, the marketing hat. And can you take one of those hats away and give it to somebody else and let them come in and invest that time at a fractional basis to help move the things forward?
And I want to build on what you said as well, Tim. Like, I think that there are things that you're predispositioned towards that you really like, but there's also, like, I feel like an interesting way to look at it. I'm trying to remember the name of the book that I just read, but it talked about this exact thing around, how are you deciding where you're investing your time? How are you deciding where you augment? And they had a really interesting matrix, and I'll try to think of the name of the book so I give this person credit for their work. But they had a really interesting matrix that kind of broke it into 4 quadrants. And the quadrant A was, things that don't necessarily make you money, but you need to do yourself. These are things that require either your specific skill set, your knowledge of something. Quadrant B was things that you really enjoy and also generate revenue or move the business forward. And those are the things where you probably want to spend most of your time. These are things that are making a meaningful impact. These are things that require your specific skill set. But then when you start to get into quadrants around, whether they be delegation or investment, you think about things that either you don't have the skill set for or aren't really moving the needle for the organization. If you think about invoicing, really important, but does it require the CEO to do that? And then, how do you actually focus on delegating or automating some of those tasks? And then you think about another quadrant, which are things that you know will pay off in the long term, but don't have an immediate impact, but need you to do it. And so it can kind of help to organize your thoughts in terms of where are you actually spending your time in a day, and looking at the value of your time as a CEO or as a leader, which the equation will change.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to really pragmatically say, okay, well, I used to do X, Y, and Z because, if I look at my effective hourly rate as a CEO, it was X, and I can hire someone to do it at this rate, et cetera, et cetera. That value changes, that equation changes, and that need for expertise changes over time. And so I think I think it'll be helpful in kind of making some of those decisions.
I really like that quadrant. And I think, if you kind of think of a small business owner, you don't know what you don't know. So if you think about the challenges, someone's starting a business, they're a few years in, are you flush with so much extra money that you can hire, the most experienced person? Commonly not, right? So what I see, at least kind of on the finance domain, is what people end up getting first is a very low cost bookkeeper. And that bookkeeper will perform certain tasks. But again, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's really hard to know what is the trigger to say, hey, I might need someone of a different caliber or with a different skill set. And it doesn't always show up in an obvious way. There will be symptoms of some problems that are coming up. But what you actually might not find is that maybe your company needs funding and you actually could really benefit from having someone come in that can take the numbers, that can take the finances, and that can really craft a story that would help you be able to secure creditors or investors at more favorable terms. Now, you didn't even necessarily know that because you kind of took what was available, or you were kind of chugging along on those ways. And I imagine that applies not just to finance and accounting, but it's, what questions can you start asking yourself as a business owner to trigger and say, I don't know what I don't know, but what else might be possible if I, brought in someone with this skill set? And I do really think one of the beauties with Fractional is that small business owners likely don't have the same budget and resources available that large companies do, where they can have someone that's specialized in all of these individual subdomains. I can imagine IT probably has more kind of subspecialties than anyone can possibly imagine. And so you can't necessarily be a small company and have a huge army of people in all of these different support functions. And I think that's where Fractional becomes really an interesting proposition, because you can then tap into someone that has a lot of that experience and a lot of that expertise, but you don't necessarily need them on a full-time, round-the-clock basis. So I think that it can be a very elegant solution for small business owners, definitely.
I think one thing that I just want to throw out there, just to do a quick clarifier, because it seems to be always fractional, like what is it in a way of something very tangible? And it's contract, typically on a retainer basis. There is so many different entry points and type of service offerings, but it's definitely contract. And the other thing is it is part-time, so a fraction of the time. So that's why, I don't want to say that someone came up with a new name. It's kind of taking the part-time and the contract and the consulting and bringing it all together in one mashup. Because the other thing too is consulting kind of was getting a bad rap as far as, here's a person that comes in that does an audit of your business and then gives you a report and walks away. And a fractional resource will continue to be part of the implementation and integration of the changes, which is really powerful, because often when you're wanting to scale or make changes, you may already be at a point of full capacity. So it's not necessarily about working more or hiring like a whole bunch of people to scale. It's about leveraging the partnerships, the tools, the technology, the resources that are out there that maybe have done this before, maybe is doing it for someone else. I don't know if you guys have also experienced this, but it felt like I was working in two different organizations at the same time, where I was trying to find marketing resources. So that was the benefit of being able to bring that insight from one organization to the other. So that is also great, is that you're finding a resource that is solving problems for other organizations that may be like your organization. So there is a bit of a fast track of insight when it comes to things like that. So sorry, Tim, I'll let you take away. I just wanted to find kind of the word fractional a little bit more as far as something tangible.
I think that's a really important thing, so that people understand what we're talking about. We probably haven't spent enough time just explaining what is fractional. There's a really good graphic that I have. I'll paste in the event chat after we're done, that just compares and contrasts consultant, coach, and fractional to kind of all those points you just made, Lindsay, that fractional becomes part of the team. and is doing as well as advising. So it's really helping to grow the organization. A lot of what Carolyn said a minute ago kind of leans to some of the notes that I had about where do I start. And one of the first questions that I would look for as somebody I would want to work with, and I would hope the leader has done this, is are they willing to learn? Are they willing to change what they're doing? And to a lot of what Carolyn said, even in the areas that I feel I'm really strong, am I willing to learn and grow in those areas? And so that's a really important thing when a small business owner is looking at delegating some of those things to a fractional person or even internally. Am I willing to trust somebody else's experience with this particular area? And I wouldn't shy away from looking at the areas where you think you're strong. If you think you're strong on the finance side, are you looking at some of those sub areas like Carolyn was talking about, to really make sure I'm doing everything I can to grow my business in capital investments or whatever the case might be, because there's so much in every area, and a small business owner can't cover it all.
So I actually am going to not challenge that necessarily, but I think one of the issues that I see, and this might be specific to technology, but leaders sometimes don't know what they don't know, and so they don't see those opportunities either. So they might not say, hey, you know what, I see this funding opportunity or XYZ. I better make sure I bring on a Carolyn or someone to fill this role. They might just be looking at some of the symptoms down the line. They might have cash flow problems. They might have trouble with their books, and they don't know what that actual kind of positive impact is either. So what's your thoughts, Tim, kind of building on what you were saying around starting more broadly and then having those fractional team members narrow them in onto those opportunities? Or do you think that most leaders that you come across already have that kind of Shangri-La state in mind?
Yeah, I would doubt it that they'd have this Shangri-La state in mind, and anybody that really does might be fooling themselves, right? I mean, you got a vision, and that's important as a leader, but you need other people to help make that happen, because you can't figure out all the parts of Shangri-La that are in there. So I'd encourage conversations with anyone, right? Because as you're talking through what's going on in the organization, let's say you're just talking to you, Keith, about technology. In that conversation, you may recognize, hey, you know what? This might not be something that's a technology problem. You might have a sales pipeline problem, or you might have something in finance, or it sounds like your operations. Maybe you should have a conversation with Lindsay or Carolyn or Vered or myself. And that's a really important thing, is being open to those conversations and just saying, hey, I'm stretched thin. I got too many hats on. This is where I think I need to go. And you start with that, right? Yeah. And I think it's really important to start somewhere, even if it might not be the right thing. You can quickly find out through conversation, is that the right thing? And just musing about problem situations to your peers, to people that are doing similar things, they might just point you in a direction to go somewhere. So conversations, small investment of a coffee with someone to chat through, or a virtual meeting, can go a long ways.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is last week we talked about goals, and we said in starting out with goals, it's great to start out by reflecting on the previous year. So if you do some reflection on the previous year and you look back at the things that you had set out to do, whether it be improvements or capturing new opportunities, have you achieved any of those? Or have you been pulled into wearing too many hats? And if that is the case, again, going back to Carolyn said, or I think it was Keith actually, originally, the quadrants. I think that's important, but for myself specifically, often it starts with the CEO who is feeling stretched too thin That's the word. That's kind of the statement used, Tim, but they're feeling overwhelmed. And as we know, when you're doing the things or you're getting pulled into the things that you're not good at, you don't want to be doing, you still have that other responsibility and even excitement of where you want to be and what you want to be doing weighing on you. It's constantly, right? You get up in the morning, you're like, oh, okay, like today's going to be a new day. I'm going to have this, this fresh perspective on all these things that I'm going to look into. And then again, the lineup is out your door. You have clients calling you. They're super frustrated because maybe you sold them the job. Maybe you're still sitting in the sales seat. Or as we know, when customers are upset, they typically will go to the president of the company. So you're getting those phone calls and you're trying to figure out what is going on, and you're navigating through the operations of your company to try to uncover what the root cause is of that phone call. Why are they upset about getting this invoice? Why are they upset that the project lead hasn't sent an email out to them to let them know how their project is doing? I was promised that I would have this project complete by now, and it's not. So all those kind of things, if that's happening to you every day and you finish your day and you feel like you shut the office door or turn off the lights, and that same kind of heaviness feeling, and it's growing and it's growing and growing, it's likely you're wearing too many hats and you're being burdened by too many things. And that's where it's like sitting from a place of a problem, right? And we all talk about through obstacles, we see opportunities, but there's also companies that are doing really, really well. And then they say, okay, let's scale, let's grow. I want to be a larger company. I want to have a broader impact. Now I'm getting some momentum, some confidence, some brand awareness. Like, let's scale, let's go across the country. Let's bring on a new product offering. Like, that's a whole other opportunity to bring on Fractional.
So
can anyone hear me? Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that's a really good point, Lindsay, and it's really about minimizing the chaos, because that's what happens when you get big. And if you don't have the opportunity to delegate some of those functions as a CEO, it's chaotic as you continue to scale, because you can't actually physically manage all of those areas and do them well. And there's trade-offs. There's always going to be trade-offs. And so, creating those structures to build those functions, to minimize the chaos, to increase confidence level of yourself in running this business because you're evolving as a CEO, and empowering your leadership team. Those are all really important aspects of scaling a business.
So
I thought we
go ahead.
No, Keith, you got it. Go.
Okay. We're gonna be over applied to each other on this now.
Don't do that. That's no fun.
Okay, so I do have a question again. I feel like I'm asking all the questions today, but in terms of where to get started, like, I feel like there's usually 6 of us around the table. There's 5 of us today. If we, the thing that I've been hearing in terms of the mindset of these leaders that are getting started on the fractional journey, they're just lost, right? They're kind of stuck in the weeds. They're not quite sure how to see out of it. From your experiences, like, is there anyone that wants to volunteer a story of like the best way that they can get started? Like, do they call HR? Do they call finance, sales? Like how do they even start to unravel this? Because there's so many different paths that you can take as well, which if they can't define the problem clearly, like, how do they actually get started, I guess would be a question that I'd throw out there.
I think sometimes it even starts off with a very small entry point. That's been my experience anyways, and not deliberately to build, it's a great opportunity to build trust between the CEO and the fractional, but for myself, I got brought in on a fractional engagement because they were onboarding a new PM software. I was out for a coffee with the CEO, and they were telling me all about it and all the magical things it was going to do. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, I had no idea that there was a software out there that could do all this stuff. That just sounds amazing. And I kept asking more questions, just out of sheer curiosity. I don't know all of the PM tools out there. And in fact, this one I wasn't really proficient in at the time. And so had just asked more and more questions. And then the CEO would go back to the team and kind of, you know, she didn't know what she didn't know. So those questions kind of sat with her, and then she went back to the team and spoke with them about, well, what about this, or what about this, and have we thought of this? And there was just a lot of blank stares back. So then that was like, well, okay, let's bring Lindsay in and let's start talking a little bit more about this, right? Because there was a problem. There was a lot of projects that got brought into the company. And what do we often do when we're overwhelmed? We hire more people, like, let's bring on more project leads, let's bring on more resources to handle this, or we bring on technology, right? Like, let's, I mean, I heard the other day, I think 5 times, it's like, well, I'm sure AI can solve this. Like, AI, I'm sure can solve this. And it's solving a lot of things, but, you know, and 5 years ago, in the last 5 years, it was like, there's got to be some sort of software that can do this for us. So yeah, that's how it started off. Like, software is going to solve all of the problems, right? But if you think about it, like, project management in itself is the fastest growing business and industry in the world. And one $20 a month software problem is going to solve scope, budget, and timeline issues. I mean, so that's, I mean, the conversation just started, but it was so small. It was about software. It wasn't about, I want to scale to $5 million and I need a fractional COO. It was, I got this new software and I'm excited about it. That was it.
And so this is something I run into all the time, and it's a terrifying thing, because I feel like people think that technology can solve all of their problems. And you know, technology can do some amazing things, and maybe our AI overlords in the future will be able to do even more incredible things. But I like to liken technology right now to it's an amplifier. So it can help add scale, it can add velocity, it can add a whole bunch of things, but it can't fix bad underlying foundations. So if you have really poor PM practices and you layer on a project management software, you're going to amplify those poor practices. If you have really poor communication as an organization and you layer on and you say, you know what, we're all using Teams or we're all using Slack, and great news, and you don't have any communication process, you're just going to have more places for people to have disparate conversations. And I think that's one of the big myths of technology, is it solves these challenges. It amplifies the right things and adds scale. It's not some sort of magical wand that fixes all of the gremlins that have grown in an organization over years.
I actually have a question for the group. And it's a question that I often get from potential clients is how does the process start? Like, what does this look like when you come in? And, you know, I think we all probably do things a little differently. And I'm curious. I think that would be really interesting for our audience to hear about today, is how does it all start? What does that look like? And how long does it take before we start to gain some traction?
I like to come into that conversation with questions of them first, to really understand what they're trying to achieve. But I think we all have our own learnings and areas and frameworks and models and things that we lean on. I think it's important to have some of those things in your back pocket, but it's never the same answer everywhere. So I kind of look at, how do I take some of the experience and what applies to this situation? And so I kind of have some things to lean on, so I'm not scratching my head. But it's a lot of questions to start. Like, what are we trying to achieve? What's the problem? What's keeping you up at night? What's the needle we're trying to move? What are the metrics? So that we can figure out what are the right things in the mix, what are the right ingredients in the recipe, so that I can do it. We have our skills in that cabinet and all those ingredients. Which ones am I pulling out for this particular problem or recipe that I'm making, right? So, but I need to make sure I understand, what do you want to accomplish? And so I'm not making a a cake for somebody who wants a steak dinner. But it's leveraging what I have to get the right answers for them.
I think the other thing is, you said making a cake for someone who wants a steak dinner. I think the only thing I'll challenge on that is sometimes they want a steak dinner, but they need a cake. So, as much as it's great to start off with an entry point that is very well defined, I think it's willingness to, you said it earlier, Tim, are you willing to change, learn, and grow? But I start most of my engagements off with, I don't like to like an audit or assessment, a discovery project. There's so many different ways that you can speak about it. So that project or client that I spoke of, it came on to just pull their software implementation over the finish line. But while that was ongoing and I was able to build some trust, there was the opportunity to have conversations, to be part of meetings, to start to do like that audit and assessment. But by being embedded on a smaller project that was running a bit more on the periphery, it gave me the opportunity to almost be a fly on the wall in a lot of conversations versus being that auditor in every single meeting. That's my experience. Is it's a great opportunity to build trust with the team, with the CEO, really all the stakeholders involved to be doing some things. And the other thing is you can gather some small wins along the way. Have you thought of this? Have you looked here? Have you talked to this person? What is the impact of that on the group? Why are you doing that? You can have those. So I mean, for me, I try to avoid just doing those coming in for meetings and conversations that feel like an outside person coming in. The quicker that I can embed in the organization, the better. So having that discovery project is my preference of like, what are we going to start with? But I always do have, for clarification, the chocolate cake and the steak conversation is, we talk about that we may be thinking we want a steak dinner and actually we really need chocolate cake. And sometimes you just need a few rounds of appetizers before you get to your steak or your chocolate cake, right? So I know I kind of bounced a bit around all of that, but that's kind of my typical entry point. And the nice thing about that is by doing that, you can get like a current state, and then it becomes an accountability metric to measure back to on how far you've come from that initial assessment. But like I said, mine is in conjunction with like an ongoing discovery project.
I just want to jump in with a key point there is multiple conversations are really important, right? So making sure that when you're engaged in a fractional resource, you ensure they speak to other people in your organization so that you're not going only on your perspective as the leader, bringing in those other perspectives. Because to your point, as you get those other perspectives and have points to leverage, you might say, you know what, it's not time for steak dinner, it's time for an appetizer. We need to have a few pre-meal beverages, whatever the case is. But it's really looking at all those different perspectives to understand what's really the problem. Because we each bring our own paradigm. And as a CEO of a small organization, we have our blinders on, whether we recognize it or not, they're there. And so those other perspectives are so important. So that's an important part, I think, of discovery is multiple conversations with multiple people at different levels in the organization.
I love the food analogy, right? And sometimes, honestly, it's not like steak and cake. It's like what you really need is to eat your vegetables. I see that a lot of times whenever it's like, hey, we really want to get this, we really want to get insights. We really want to like elevate our reporting. We want to do all of these things, but there's some foundational pieces that your data's a mess. You don't have a proper structure, right? It would be the same idea. Keith, you probably come across it a lot where it's like, hey, we want to implement this wonderful algorithm. And it's like, hey, we have no data. Like there's like, so the foundation piece is there. But I think there is a validity to like if you've ever gone into a store and you're like, oh, these are some nice things, you kind of look down at the price tag and you're like, oh, let me just back my way out here. So I do think at some point in the process, like you want to be able to do or to like ask for some sort of a proposal. And it's a bit of a dance because how good of a proposal are you going to get if you haven't done a proper scope and assessment and kind of current state view, like Tim and Lindsay were mentioning? At the same time, you also kind of want to know, like, is this going to be, am I really looking for a Toyota Corolla and I'm walking around a Porsche store? So you do kind of want to use some of the language around, what would a proposal look like? And then you can kind of start going in that, you can kind of go in that back and forth to say, okay, I would love to have all of these different things, but maybe out of these 10 different problems, this is the one that's really, really pressing, and then you can kind of treat it as a little bit of a negotiation back and forth. What do you guys think? How do you guys feel like if a new business owner comes to you and they ask for kind of a proposal? It's kind of a little different than, if you're looking to hire an employee, you can pretty easily go on Glassdoor. You can kind of get an idea of like, okay, pay ranges change or they kind of vary, but this is roughly what you're kind of looking for. Sometimes I think one of the barriers that companies face when they're looking at hiring a fractional is that they have no idea what the price tag is going to be. So I usually kind of encourage, like, really, it's not a one size fits all. It's, what do you need? And then let's kind of customize it to your needs. But I don't know. Let me ask a question. Has anyone here ever been offended at giving, a quote or a proposal, like as fractional provider? Like, I don't think anyone does, but sometimes I think you're reluctant to kind of say, what would it look like to work with you? And that also entails understanding the budget associated with it. How have you guys kind of found those experiences?
I think one of the things.
Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
I was going to add that as both as a CEO and as a fractional person, it's really important to understand that presenting a proposal is a conversation. It's not something you flip over the fence because it doesn't serve either party, right? So if you're looking to hire a fractional resource, you really want to understand the value that you're getting. And so if you just go down to the bottom line and go, well, that's how much a Porsche costs, I'm out. Like, you really need to understand, what is the value I'm getting out of this, right? What is the value of this option? And that's a conversation. So it's something that you need to make sure is that you're using that proposal as a conversation. And so you're having a chance to do that back and forth like you're just talking about, Carolyn. So does this make sense? What does this mean? How are we going to measure the value of this? Am I going to get what I want to achieve? So does that give me return on investment of what I'm doing here? And this is not a cost. This is an investment. I need to make sure that you understand that return.
Yeah, I was just going to actually talk a little bit about what I have found works over the years. I used to be, again, pretty flexible around just coming in and putting out some fires, but what happens is that reactivity doesn't get them further, and so I've actually been pretty strict around using our typical process because it's really important for me to ensure that we remain accountable to adding value and making an impact very quickly. And so that current state analysis against where they want to take the organization and looking at those gaps and building an action plan that matches whatever else is happening in the organization, being mindful of that, of where they're at in that journey and how much change they can absorb, and building that plan to move forward is the approach that I typically take. And so it's a pretty structured process around this is sort of that analysis piece, and we build a proposal around that, and this is what you can expect for a monthly retainer for the next 12 to 18 months to build out all those components, to be an extension of your team, to be integrated and support you as a fractional HR professional.
I think the other thing that's important too is I thought you were going to go down the path, Carolyn, when you were talking about going into a store and then backing away. But in my experience as well, that first kind of 6 to 12 weeks assessment analysis period, small project entry point, whatever, however you decide to deal commence work with an organization, the power is it's a bit of a trial. It's a really great opportunity to see if there's a fit.
On both sides
on both sides of that. Fractional resources, and everyone's going to vary depending on how they work. But myself specifically, I fully embed in the organization. I become part of a team. I hire individuals, do performance reviews, work very, very, very closely with the CEO and the other executives and leaders on the in the organization. So there has to be like a fit. A culture fit is super important. Are you value aligned? Ideally, you can have all those conversations before you start. But as we all know, sometimes those things still sit in the bucket of aspirational, or there's something they haven't done yet, or there's something that they have just rolled out. So definitely, I think that's the other great thing about the first, I say sometimes 6 weeks, because it can be a shorter assessment depending on the size of the company or what they're looking to uncover, but really 3 months. And it's a great opportunity to kind of try the shoes on, see how they fit on both sides. Yes, for sure.
One of the things that I was super surprised about, so when we all got together in person recently and went out for a beer, just the difference, you talked about your, the high value that you put on embedding in an organization, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it was something where we just saw it very differently and took very different approaches. And so even on this, I prefer to, obviously get to know the organization. It's important to understand kind of the dynamics, but there's also, a power on sitting on the sidelines a little bit and being able to be Switzerland, to be able to kind of observe from, close perspective, but not necessarily in the day-to-day. And what I thought was really surprising was across even our group of the 6 of us, that there was a variety of different approaches and philosophies on that one thing alone. And so I think the importance of validating, okay, does this person fit what I'm looking for my organization, but also does their style fit, does the way that they dive in, does the way they engage, all those things are unique, because you're not buying that individual person to dive into your organization when you are hiring those senior level fractional folks. I think that as you start to get into some of the more operational delivery, which I know some of us, we will have kind of the strategic consulting as well as some of the operational execution as part of our business models. I think that as you get more operational, the delivery becomes a little more documented, more process oriented, more tactical. But I do think it's quite interesting, just the change in philosophies there.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I will say, I'd love to have a second operational fractional on here to pick their brain, but it's pretty hard to not be embedded when you're involved in operations, because as we know, they're always moving. So it's hard to be on the outside. One thing that I just wanted to kind of like throw out there, wonder if we can maybe for the last bit of our conversation today chat about, is the freelance, the future of freelance. I know we see it all over social media, in the news, and I read some sort of crazy headline the other day that said by 2030, 80% of the world will be freelance, some sort of freelance. So, there is just crazy different ways of working. And I know, Vered, like you told me this morning, you're doing a chat today on remote work, on the news today at lunch. And part of that, I think individuals are looking for different ways of working that really work for them. And so, freelance, as we've even said on this call here, like we're fractional executives, but there's freelancers out there. There's so many resources for that. We are a form of freelance that come into an organization. Contractors, there's, a lot of organizations are like, let's have a lot of generalists and then bring in specialists for something very, very specific. Carolyn, you spoke about, bringing in money, capital, maybe grants, certain things like that. Tim, you had the biggest reaction with your face. So
I don't play poker. I got no poker face, and you know me well enough, Lindsay.
I'm curious. It's kind of everywhere out there right now. We've all gone ahead and wanted to do that ourselves, autonomy, freedom, being able to be creative, whatever it is that has driven us. But there's a lot of individuals out there, or like that are leaning into like the fractional, the contract, the freelance, the whatever you want to call it. It's everywhere. So is this just the tip of the iceberg, I guess?
I think it's important in not being able to really dig into that article. I would say there's certain areas that 80% might freelance. But to say 80% of the world it won't work. An organization, especially at a certain size, needs some consistency, and everybody in that organization plays a role. Even the people that sweep the floor and keep it clean, right? And that's what they do. And so I really have trouble thinking that everything will be freelance, because there's many roles, particularly in operations. You need people there consistently. You need somebody there to open the door every day at 8 a.m. and close it every day at 6 p.m. You need somebody there working that one machine to make whatever the case is. And there are, I'm going to use the word pluggers, and it's not maybe the best word to use, but you need some pluggers in your organization to keep things going. And that's not necessarily freelance. And that is their role and what they need to do to keep their organization going. When you look at other things where you need knowledge workers and leveraging information and specialists, like you were just talking about a second ago, because I'm working on improving my project management, I need someone to come in and really have skills there. That lends itself well to freelance. Bring them in, work with the team, embed them in the organization, teach some of those skills so that everybody learns, and then you can offboard them and move on, right? So there's certain things freelance works excellent for, certain things it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
I don't know. I think I'm going to challenge it a little bit, because we've seen the evolution of how we can bring fractional executives in, and they can still be an extension of your team and get accustomed to the culture, be part of that culture. And so I think there's an opportunity to maybe have a different perspective on the term freelance. I think historically we've thought of it as like an external person, and they're just like an outside spoke, and you bring them in when you need some extra support. But I think it's just sort of a legality thing that it will evolve to, and truly I think there's an opportunity, and we're seeing it in the spaces that we work in, to still have that individual as part of a team, part of a culture. I think historically that's been sort of the challenge, is that you miss out on the cultural components of it, which support productivity and engagement. And I think we're shifting, and we're not seeing that as sort of the barrier to building those workplaces.
I would completely agree, Baird. Like I think that as some of these, even like technology is a great equalizer on this front. And I think that as some of the, whether they be demographics, whether they be some of the interests, whether they be some of the different external factors that are influencing even how people want to work, and I don't profess to be anywhere near as much of an expert as you are on this, Baird, but I think as all of these things start to change, how people want to engage with their employers is different. And I think that the idea that you show up for your 40 hours a week, clock in, clock out, that during the hours of 3 and 4, you never see a customer every day, and so that's when you play solitaire on the computer. Like I think that those days are kind of becoming numbered, and the idea that you can look at complete ecosystems and say, how am I putting people or technology in the right spots, whether they be freelance, whether they be contractors, whether they be fractional, whether they be external partnerships, and really painting these whole ecosystems to deliver on specific goals and missions rather than just an army of people. And I think that even as I've been growing Deliver Digital, that's something that I've been struggling with myself. And I know, we had a conversation around this the other day where all of our scale right now is being delivered through subcontractors. And I'm wrestling with the kind of the traditional philosophy of how do they feel like part of the organization. And I think that the reality is like all it is a contract. You know, you can still include them, you can still make them feel part of the mission, you can still invite them to a summit, you can still drop off a bottle of wine at Christmas. But I think that some of the structure of how people engage with their employers and the purposes that they have is going to be less one-to-one. And I think it'll allow them to leverage specific niche skill sets to be able to deliver what they're really excellent at to a variety of places.
Absolutely. And actually, we've seen the evolution too, where many people, even if they have a permanent full-time role, will have a secondary job, where they're working on contract, doing these side gigs. And that is so common, especially in some of the younger generations in the workforce.
Yeah, I think the verdict is still out, right? You think back 30 years ago, there was maybe a dozen websites, and here we are, we have artificial intelligence. I don't know 30 years from now what it's going to look like. But I think you tapped on the key thing, Keith, is like, no matter what, and I think Verity mentioned it too, like, no matter what, at the end of the day, whether you're contracting with a totally outside vendor, a freelancer, a contractor, you're dealing with humans. Humans respond to other humans. So regardless of exactly what form and shape that goes into, like, there's a human on the other side, and it's about kind of tying them into what your purpose is. So I think it's too soon to say. I don't know. I'm pretty curious to see what's this world going to look like, right? Like, for any of us that have children, like, what is it going to be like, right? Like the advice is so changed. I think back to like my parents, and they're like, get a good job and work there for 40 years. I'm like, that doesn't apply anymore. So like, who even knows? I think you just keep yourself nimble, keep agile, and it's going to be a fun ride. That's for sure.
Yeah, and that could be, it's interesting you say that. I'm not sure what the stat would be, but I felt like a few years ago it was, you can expect an employee for potentially 2 years. Like that was like the average commitment to an organization before they would move on. And so maybe there is a little bit of this evolution, even to protect yourself as an organization, to have, and it's probably a bit of a blend of both as it evolves. So like Tim, I agree. You still have to have your core, you have to have your general group, but then to be able to plug and play and bring different individuals in. Lean manufacturing it kind of pulls on lean manufacturing in a way of like, you have this lean group of agile individuals who can do a lot of the things, and you better make sure those individuals can, like the core of your business can, pay for your operating costs, your business, your office, what have you. But to be able to ebb and flow when the demand is there is pretty powerful. But yeah, so maybe we're just, I guess, about 5 minutes away. And I'm just going to jump back to the original topic for today. So we've talked about symptoms. We've talked about entry points into an organization. And, how do you know it's what you need? So, I mean, come watch the Fractional Forum. We're here every single week. There's lots of fractional resources on LinkedIn. I think that seems to be the place where most fractionals hang out. So get in a conversation. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that, but I think that's my plug.
I'll jump in on the conversation piece that you had there and start a conversation, right? With your team, with other fractional people, with some of us. We're all happy to connect and have a short conversation. So we just encourage you to just chat about it and get those different perspectives, and then figure out what makes sense for you and your organization.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would kind of add is just like also have a conversation with other business owners. Like, hey, what are you doing in this space? What are you doing in that space? And that can be a great way to find someone, that's been trusted, or, that it's kind of like, you've seen them do good things, or you've had kind of like that referral, right? Really makes a big difference. So I would talk to those people and get those perspectives as well.
I'd like to give credit to the Matrix. If I did a Google, I multitasked during our call here a tiny bit. And it's Dan Martell. It's the Drip Matrix, and it's from a book called Buy Back Your Time. It's a great book. I enjoyed it, and would recommend reading it. Were you looking for it, Lindsay? I feel like you have a copy of it based on around there.
Maybe. I get a lot of books, and then I feel like they kind of pop out when they're important. So we'll see. I've definitely heard about it.
Yeah, it was a great book, and so he explains it 100 million times more eloquently than I do. In terms of the actual kind of purpose of the episode, where do I start? I think that with a conversation, and I think one of the eggs that I would recommend watching out for is if you have someone come in that just pitches right away and talks about how awesome they are. I feel like the DNA that connects all of us on this call is the curiosity and just wanting to uncover some of those challenges. And I think you heard it, over and over again, where we just want to ask questions, we want to learn, we want to do that discovery, and that is the whole foundation that holds up all of the other work that happens. And if someone comes in and doesn't ask those questions, I would probably run in the other direction. And I think getting started with the conversation and the curiosity is going to lead you to some pretty incredible places.
Yeah, absolutely. And also another little watch out is beware of the people that can help you in all the areas, or say that they can help you in all the areas, because they can't. You as a leader are not an expert in all areas, and neither is the potential fractional person that you're bringing in. So, I think a tried and true process of how they're going to come in and make an impact. I think there's a lot of wisdom that we offer as well, because of the multiple engagements that we've gone through, as Lindsay had mentioned before. We've problem solved this before, so we can hit the ground running, and there's less time that's taken to find the right solution.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Vered, Tim, Carolyn, Keith, and Tracy. Hopefully she's, feeling better today, getting some rest. And thank you to any of the guests that we've had on the show. I apologize if you've been commenting. This is my very first time running the technology behind the scenes, and I figured something would pop up and yell at me and tell me if I needed to post a message or say something. So I'm not too sure what happened, but we'll see. We'll check in the different chats of the streams, and I'm sure one of our fractional executives will reach out and, hopefully answer any of your questions. But we will be here next week, same time, same place. And yes, hopefully we will have six windows up next week. Tracy will rise from the dead and feel better. And so all right, have a good day, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and enjoy the sunshine.
Awesome. Thanks.